Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's Thinking About webinar. This week, Kingsdale Foundation School is hosting it, and the topic is thinking about climate change. We are very lucky this evening. We have got two speakers with us today from two top renewable energy companies. We've got Diana, who is the ESG manager at Sonnedix, where she is responsible for the development and continuous improvement in sustainable energy. And we've got Megan Smith, who is the head of offshore wind advisory at the Carbon Trust. I'd like to just welcome all the schools today from Southwark Schools Learning Partnership, and also to introduce two of our Year 13 students at Kingsdale Foundation School, Tom Hyatt and Sharon Mahoney, who are going to be hosting today's webinar. They are two geography students, and they are also hoping to study geography next year at university. So they are going to be managing the questions for us this evening, and will be answering and directing questions to our speakers. So first of all, we have got Megan Smith, who is going to present for us, and then after that, the Year 13 students are going to take over and will be presenting. So thank you very much for joining, and I hope that you enjoy the speeches this evening.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. As Lizzie said, I'm Megan Smith. I head the offshore wind advisory team at the Carbon Trust, and I've been working in offshore wind for about 12 years now. So I'm going to share a quick presentation. I'm going to start off with a video that hopefully gives you a kind of overview about what is offshore wind and why is it so important, and also why is it so interesting. So let me attempt to do this. Go. Okay.
Europe now has 13 gigawatts of offshore wind. It's becoming a mainstream part of our power supply. Costs are falling rapidly. Offshore wind is now competitive with other forms of power generation, and it's creating jobs, growth, and investments. Nearly 100,000 Europeans now work in offshore wind and the supply chain and all the logistics around it. It's one of the fastest growing sectors of the UK economy. The technology continues to advance, and the European industry is now exporting that technology to the rapidly growing offshore wind markets around the world. However, what we've achieved so far is only a fraction of the huge potential for offshore wind in Europe. And it's only a fraction of what we need from offshore wind. We need significantly more offshore wind to tackle the urgent CO2 challenge and to deliver secure and affordable energy as Europe transitions out of other forms of power generation. Whether offshore wind fulfills those needs and delivers on its huge potential depends on decisions and commitments that have to be taken by governments and industry. Together, industry and governments, we can drive innovation, bring costs down, create jobs and growth, make investments happen, reduce emissions, and deliver the secure and affordable energy our citizens need.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a bit of a background of what offshore wind is, and maybe the scale as well of the kind of technology that we have to deploy, and also why it fits into the climate change context. So essentially, offshore wind is a renewable energy. It means that we don't need to use more carbon intensive forms of energy generation like coal and gas and oil. So when I talk about offshore wind, I mean about wind that's in the sea, essentially. There's a lot of onshore wind. It's similar kind of technology, but massive challenges. And actually the area of growth we're really seeing is offshore, because we've got a lot of sea, especially in the UK, that we can build in, and we're sort of land constrained onshore. So this gives you kind of a quick overview of what we mean by an offshore wind farm. We mean the sort of the turbines, the substations, and then the cable to shore. And actually this red cable here to shore can be up to 200 kilometers long. These are really quite far offshore now. As you saw in the video, this is really technology at quite a big scale. Offshore wind turbines are the largest rotating machines on Earth. The thrust involved with the sort of forces on the blades, so the rotors, is equivalent to that of a jet plane. And your blade tip speed, so right at the end of the blades as they rotate, is around 200 miles an hour on average. This is huge technology. They're as big as the Shard in London. You can fit 4 of the biggest jumbo jets inside the swept area of a turbine. So with that, it's a huge value of energy generation, but also massive technology challenges. And this is just one example, how you just get one blade for one turbine offshore is a bit of a challenge. And as you can see here, a bit of a logistical challenge. And actually in this, they often have to take out traffic lights and things like that just to get the blades to site. So why is the UK important in this? We're world leaders in offshore wind. You can see on that graph there, over 33% of the total offshore wind in the entire world is just in the UK. We have also the biggest offshore wind farm in the world installed in our waters too. So we really are pioneers and have huge market share. It's not something I think we shout about enough. Just 2 weeks ago, Boris Johnson said, we will become the Saudi Arabia of wind. And we already are. We're world leaders. I think, wind has a lot more potential, of course, but there's a lot going on. It's quite exciting. So where are these wind farms? If we're so great, where are they? So this is a quick map of just where the current projects are. So you can see the yellow and blue ones, they're quite small and relatively, they're actually giants, but according to this map, they're quite small and close to the shore. But actually, as the technology is progressing, the wind farms are getting much larger and much further from shore as well, which is where the wind is. So that's good. So you can see the red zones are a lot further out, really in the middle of the North Sea, which brings its own challenges. So this is all great, but let's put this into perspective. So at the moment, there's 30 gigawatts of offshore wind, which is quite a lot. And this is in the world, not just the UK. But actually, when you compare that to onshore wind, we've got 540 gigawatts globally. So actually, offshore wind's very small in the wider wind industry. But then if you look at that compared to coal, offshore wind is teeny, teeny, tiny. So really, to make a massive impact from a climate change perspective, we've got a long way to go, and a lot of challenges ahead. But we're really going to, I've been working in the industry for 12 years now, and the momentum, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, has been crazy. The amount of projects being built and deployed and the ambitions is just going up and up and up. So that's really exciting. But yeah, as you can see, a long way to go. So just taking a step back, how are we going to achieve that? Research and development has kind of a significant part to play. And this is what I do and what I manage. Offshore wind industry is huge. There's so many elements to it. There's the kind of construction, building the turbines themselves, doing the electrical components, designing the layout of a wind farm, the kind of maintenance, going out, getting on a boat, going out to the turbines, fixing them when they break, the kind of environmental impact assessments, understanding how we can make sure these impact as little as possible on marine mammals like whales or seals or birds as well, and really understanding how we can work best with environmental organizations too. So many different elements. And what I do, as I mentioned, was research and development, so bringing new technologies to market. This is just a few pictures of the hundreds of projects that we've done. So ranging from new, so the second one along on the top row is a new type of kind of structure that the turbines can sit on. And because it's only got 3 legs instead of 4, it uses less steel and is cheaper. There are new ways of installing the monopile, like the foundations offshore. And at the bottom, you can see some boats and vessels. And I mean, the scale of these things are huge. So making sure what we're building is the right thing, because I mean, the boat on the bottom right, the big one there, that's probably worth about, I don't know, 200 million. So we need to make sure we get it right. So yeah, there's a lot more to do, a lot of work to be done, and a lot of opportunity in the UK to do that. So I think that's it. So hopefully I've given you a good overview of offshore wind, and I'm happy to take any questions at this point or in the Q&A later.
I think I can go first. So you were saying earlier about how it's a bit of like a logistical nightmare. It's not very practical, slogging around all these turbines and things. But in terms of like, I can imagine the governments, you know, they're not 100% on board with sustainable technology, I can imagine. So is there any problems in terms of, you know, getting them to agree with it all?
That's a really, really good question. So the government provides subsidy, basically, to the offshore wind farms to build them. But what's really interesting is in the last 3 years, actually they're so cheap to build compared to other technologies like gas and nuclear, they don't need that subsidy anymore. The technology is so advanced now. It's still incredibly expensive, but it's actually comparable to building a coal-fired power station or a gas power station, and significantly cheaper than nuclear, for example. So we're going to this really exciting stage in the industry where we're moving away from that sort of reliance on government. So actually we don't really care what the government thinks or want to support, because actually it's sort of self-sustaining. That said, the UK government's very supportive of it. In general, more from a kind of security of supply. We import all of our gas, for example, and so if that supply gets cut off, that causes problems. We don't import our wind, it's already there, so that's fine. And also job creation is huge, thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs in offshore wind. So that's a really positive thing for the industry too.
My question is, how effective do you think wind power will be in reducing carbon emissions?
Again, I think that a very good question. I mean, it really depends on how much we can build, really, and what it's replacing as well. I think, offshore wind is a very low carbon energy source, but we need to get the cost down, and so the costs in Europe are very low, but we're really reaching capacity. We're sort of running out of space to put our turbines quite quickly. Probably in about 2050, we'll be sort of reaching the limit of what we can install. But globally, we're just scratching the surface. So if we can make the sort of global wind markets cost comparable and sort of economic to build and develop, then I think, give it 20, 30 years, offshore wind's going to be a major, major player. It already is in Europe and globally in terms of energy generation, and that will directly be edging out coal, primarily coal, to be honest, and then gas and nuclear to a smaller extent as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I've just got one more. So it's obviously quite a new field. I'm sure it is in uni, that's with the sustainable development and things. But do you know of any other courses where you can sort of learn about this stuff in the field?
For offshore wind, I mean, it depends kind of what area of offshore wind, because the market is so broad. There are so many different things. So my background, I'm a mathematician. I looked at aerofoil flow, and I started in the research and development of how wind flows through a wind farm. So that's kind of how I got into it. There are people in my team who are naval architects, so A lot of electrical engineers, so people who did electrical engineering and then went into working for Siemens or Vestas, developing turbines, or just the cables as well, or the switchgear, or then sort of went into one area of electrical engineering and then switched over to offshore wind. We've got structural engineers. Yeah, I mean, I would say there are renewable energy engineering courses, but the majority of people that I work with tend to come from such a range of different backgrounds. And then there's the kind of environmental consenting people, so people that have done like sort of environmental and like environmental impact courses, and a lot of geographers actually. Yeah, I mean, huge range.
Back to me. Other than wind power, are there any other projects that the Carbon Trust is involved in, specifically like in London as well?
Yeah, loads. We are based in Southwark, actually. So my team, there's about 20 of us in my team and about 200 of us in the whole company. We do a lot of carbon footprinting. Offshore wind is one of the biggest areas in renewable energy that we do. But we do lots of energy efficiency work, policy. We work really closely with the UK government on renewable energy policy and low carbon policy, and increasingly around the world. So at the moment, we're advising governments in Japan, China, India, Colombia, US on how they can sort of transition to low carbon better. So yeah, a lot of different areas.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that now we will obviously open the floor a little bit later, and some of the attendees who have joined as well will have their chance to ask questions. But now we're going to move on to Diana, who's going to speak about solar energy. Thank you.
So hello, everybody. My name is Diana, as Lizzie said, and I'm the ESG manager for Sonnedix. ESG stands for Environment, Social and Governance, which are the three core pillars of sustainability, the term I believe you're all familiar with. So I work for the company called Sonnedix. The slides are not moving for some reason. Let me just try. Perfect. So I work for the company called Sonnedix, and what we do is we develop, build, and operate solar plants across the world. Currently, in our portfolio, we have approximately 2 gigawatts of PV plant projects, and I will talk a little bit later about what gigawatts and megawatts mean, because this is the terminology that is often used in solar sector. But just to put this into perspective, that means that approximately, depending on the size of the plants, we operate around 400 solar plants across the world. We take sustainability very seriously in our business, and we have been recognized externally on numerous occasions for our outstanding sustainability performance. One of them being by the platform called GRESB, where for 3 consecutive years we were named the solar industry sector lead when it comes to sustainability. So just to, I included a few pictures from our projects and plants across the world, just for you to see how medium scale solar projects look like. Just a small disclaimer, when it comes to the plants in Japan, we did not cut any of the trees to build this particular plant. What we try to always achieve on our project is to avoid any biodiversity loss. So on this particular occasion, we used the abandoned golf course in order to build this particular project. So going back to the topic of climate change and the role of renewables, as I'm sure all of you know, we can produce electricity through non-renewable sources of energy and renewable sources. So non-renewable would be coal, oil and gas, and renewable would be solar, wind and hydro, for example. So the issue here is that ever since the Industrial Revolution, we've been extracting and burning quite a lot of these non-renewable sources. And each time we burn these, a lot of greenhouse gases emissions go directly into our atmosphere, causing something that is called global warming. Again, I'm sure lots of you have already heard about this on numerous occasions. And there are lots of climate skeptics who would argue that we've been through the periods of global warming throughout the history of the planet Earth. But what the issue now is that these changes are now happening at such a unprecedented pace, and they are a direct result of our human activity. So the planet Earth actually anymore does not have time to regenerate for the negative impact that we produce. So how does the solar play an important role here? And what is solar energy? There is a very, very kind of complex science behind in terms of how photovoltaics actually work. And this particular phenomena was first explained by Einstein, who actually earned his Nobel Prize in 1921 by defining this particular concept. But in very, very, very simple terms, solar sunlight shines out onto the solar panels, and then solar panels containing little solar cells convert sun energy into electricity, and that electricity then gets further distributed to our households, industry, and similar through the grid, through various underground cables or overhead lines. And the interesting thing is that solar panels are largely made of silicon, which is nothing more than purified sand. And it is very important to mention that silicon is actually the second most abundant material in the Earth's crust, immediately after the oxygen. So that means that we are using sustainable electricity source such as sun energy, but also sustainable materials which are very abundant on planet Earth. And again, to put everything into perspective, so 1 megawatt of solar is actually equivalent of 1 football pitch. And then this 1 football pitch of solar panels actually produces sufficient power, electricity, to power 200 homes per year. And then this is equivalent to avoiding an average of 1,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions per year in comparison to using fossil fuels. So significant savings and advantages of the solar sector. And just an interesting fun fact, it actually, despite sun being so far away, for the sun to reach actually our panels, it takes only 8 minutes and 20 seconds. I also included this graph, which might look complex, but I just wanted to try and demonstrate how solar is actually currently at a tipping point. And we're only at the beginning, as you can see on the graph in 2020. And I thought it is important to include these slides because in approximately 20 years' time, you see from the graph that the actual demand for solar energy is going to only exponentially grow. So there is a very, very high possibility that some of you who are attending the presentation today might end up in a career in solar sector. So what is the future of solar? The solar is not just solar panels sitting somewhere on the grass field. I included some examples of some of the technologies that have already been deployed across the world, but maybe not at the commercial scale, but also some more futuristic examples. So, for example, you can see on the first picture, this is called agrivoltaics. Which are basically transparent panels which allow for the sun to reach underneath the planet, so we can very efficiently use the land to grow various crops underneath and therefore use valuable land resources. Or other examples are floating solar or solar used as shading on the car parks or as tiles on the rooftops. But also, as I said, some more futuristic examples, which as far as I know, have not yet been deployed, such as use of solar on the electric cars or solar power airplanes. I hope actually, so it would be up to your generation to actually make some of these possible, and hopefully to come up with some new innovations in terms of how we can use solar further. And finally, from my side, I just wanted to also include a slide on how, what actually sustainability professionals do in solar sector. So it's not just the engineers who work in the solar sector. As I said, once solar plants are built, they produce zero CO2. However, there is a lot of carbon that is still associated with us running our offices, or when it comes to the construction of our projects. So myself and my team, we try to make sure that we as a business are carbon neutral, and that we minimize, reduce, or offset any carbon associated with our activity. Solar also use a lot of resources. For example, there is a lot of water required to clean the panels, or there is a lot of waste produced once these panels needs to be replaced. So these all has to be carefully managed and disposed. Again, in order to tackle climate change, we do not only focus on greenhouse gases emissions or biodiversity losses. It is very important to focus on social component as well. So in Sonnedix, we aim to increase educational initiatives related to renewable energy and climate change, and also improve a socioeconomic well-being of the communities in which we operate. And finally, on the governance side, it's all about transparency, accountability, but also diversity and inclusion. So as you can see on the pictures, we try to employ as many women as possible on our projects. And we are also striving to achieve zero accidents and incidents on our projects. And one of the initiatives that I thought might be of your interest is that we have recently launched the Sonnedix Sustainability Academy, which is our platform for communicated sustainability related topics to students and teachers. So we have very ambitious targets to reach 100,000 learners over the next 3 years. And in order to achieve that, we have produced numerous educational resources tackling climate change, solar energy, lots of lessons plans, all applicable to different age groups. So I would encourage those of you who are interested just to visit the web page provided on this particular slide, and hopefully you would find lots of educational resources that are of your interest. So our vision in Sonnedix is to create a bright future. So my question to you is, what is yours? Our pledge is to create as many sustainable leaders as possible. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The world needs lots of climate leaders if we are to tackle the sustainability challenges that we are experiencing nowadays. So you do not have to be a sustainability professional in order to be a climate leader. It is enough to spread the word, raise awareness, and be the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great. I'll just start. So you were showing us earlier about how the sort of like you've got a lot of large scale projects going on in I think it was Italy and Japan and places like that. Would you say it's kind of the same in the UK? Do we have these kind of projects sitting around as well?
Yes, so believe it or not, you do not always necessarily have to have too much sun in order to be able to produce solar energy. Sometimes even in very hot climates in deserts, due to the very high temperatures, there are some losses in the electricity production. So lots of sun does not necessarily immediately equates to lots of solar energy. So yes, there are a number of solar projects across the UK despite not so nice weather throughout the year.
So my question is it expensive, like solar energy, like actually carrying it out? And is your company developing any ways to make it more affordable?
Actually, that is a very good question. I think only recently, a couple of months ago, solar reached the absolute kind of minimum price and is currently cheaper to build a solar project than to burn coal, which used to be the cheapest source of electricity production in the whole world. So currently, when it comes to all of the renewable energy or non-renewable energy, solar is the cheapest electricity generation source.
I've just got one more. So just following up on that a bit, you said that you know, our demand is going to rise quite a lot in terms of solar energy in the future. Do you think we'll genuinely be able to keep up with that? I know it's cheap and everything, but does it take quite long to produce, or is it actually quite short?
It's actually quite short. It would depend on the scale of the project, but normally the construction time to develop a medium scale solar project is approximately 3 months. And for example, Megan can comment, it takes normally much longer time to build the offshore project or onshore project. So again, it's a relatively simple technology to easily deploy on the sites.
Okay, as a final question for all of you, just a debate. In your opinion, which one is better, solar or wind energy, and why?
I'm happy to start. Actually, prior to joining Sonnedix, I used to be the onshore wind leader in another company. So they're both very close and dear to my heart. And I think they're totally different types of technologies, both absolutely needed if we are to tackle the sustainability challenges. So my heart goes to both.
Yeah, I'd completely echo that. In order to be sustainable in renewable energy, we need what's called an energy mix. We need energy from a variety of sources. Solar and wind have different strengths and different weaknesses, and they complement each other very well. So I think, especially when talking about energy generation, it's difficult to say one's better than the other. And I genuinely believe we need solar. Solar is better in some markets, wind is better in some markets, and they work very well together. So yeah.
Great. Okay, I guess I'll just start with the Q&A now. So Mike's just asking, how much more efficient are turbines on water than to those on land?
It depends is the answer. So turbines on water that are large turbines, so the bigger kind of 10 megawatt ones, like ones that can, one turbine powers a whole town kind of thing. I mean, they're huge, are about 55% efficient. And there's what's called the capacity factor. So on average, over a year, a 10 megawatt turbine will be producing 5 megawatt hours. 5 megawatts per hour kind of thing. On land, because you've got kind of bumpy, you know, you've got trees, you've got houses, you've got, you know, wind, you know, offshore, you've got a nice flat surface. On land, it's all bumpy. You have a lot more turbulence. So naturally, they're a lot less efficient. So the sort of capacity factors onshore with the small, and you can't use the bigger turbines as well on the land because the technology doesn't work. So they're more like 3 megawatt turbines, and they're normally about 30%. But a quote that I've stuck with me is efficiency itself is of no concern when the gods pay for the wind. It doesn't matter how efficient a turbine is, it matters how much it costs to get the energy out of it. So obviously, if you can get it more efficient, then the cost will look better, but it's irrelevant. So actually onshore, it's cheaper to install onshore because you're not 200 kilometers out in the North Sea. So it swings and roundabouts.
Another question from the Q&A is why isn't the Carbon Trust works done by the Department for Energy and Industrial Strategy?
Yeah, interesting question. We do a lot of work for them. So a lot of our contracts come directly for them. So a lot of policy, UK government policy, industrial strategy policy, kind of we will help develop with them. We're a not-for-profit, but we are sort of separate from government, and actually that independence is incredibly important because we have the link with industry. So the people that actually, so we're not government, so the people that are actually building these wind farms kind of can use us as a kind of representative as well. Also, a lot of the work we do on research and development isn't just like direct funding necessarily, it's bringing together the industry. So the people that build these wind farms. So for example, at the moment, we have a large scale program where we've delivered over £100 million worth of R&D. And basically that's funded jointly by 9 offshore wind developers. So they put £1 in, and then the UK government puts a bit of money. And so you end up with this massive pot of money that we can do R&D projects that are incredibly expensive to run, but actually when you're splitting it, 10 ways, it makes it a lot easier. So we work very closely with BEIS, who's the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and also the FCO, looking at how we can export UK expertise in supply chain abroad as well. So yeah.
Cool. Tom's just asked that, different Tom has just asked, how can these projects be rolled out in the developing or emerging world?
Wind or solar?
Either.
Solar.
So they are actually already being heavily deployed in the developing world. For example, I worked on a really large 2 gigawatts project in Egypt, which employed 10,000 construction workers during the peak construction. So as I said, these projects are already being developed in the developing world. And especially I would say solar is a very favorable technology to use in those countries and geographies where there is a lack of the grid infrastructure, so where there are no transmission lines to easily transport that technology, then solar plays an important role in such countries, for example, in Africa.
Another question from Charlie is, how reliable is solar energy?
It's actually quite reliable. So it would very much depend also on the time of the year. But this is why normally solar developers such as Sonnedix would build these projects in different parts of the world to make sure that throughout the year we produce sufficient electricity and revenues for our company. So for example, if it's the winter time in Europe, we still have our projects which are fully operating in Chile or Japan or other parts of the world. So this is why it's very important for the developers to kind of make their strategies taking into consideration the different seasons and different geographies across the world.
Cool. Jamie's just asked, do you believe that this could become the most efficient and reliable source of energy one day? And if so, how long would that be?
Again, is it for solar or wind or both?
Both.
Definitely. As I presented in the graph, solar is only predicted to exponentially grow. And again, with the increased use, for example, electrical cars, we expect to be kind of using solar to power cars, directly to power households, businesses, and similar. So definitely something that is very easily deployable and is only predicted to grow in future.
Should I cover from offshore wind? So yeah, again, similarly, it will grow, but I think going back to my previous point about we need that energy mix across all different technologies. Globally, offshore wind is going to grow hugely and be an incredibly important source of energy, but it's not particularly useful for countries like Switzerland, for example, who don't have much offshore to put wind in. So it's going to be a sort of, for some countries, it's going to be a lot more relevant to others. So for example, Japan, I think it's going to be hugely, hugely important, and in the UK as well, whereas other countries less so. But I think overall, yes, we're going to, in 20 years time, we'll be seeing a very, very different world in terms of where we're getting our energy from.
Another question from Max is, for Dijana or Megan, as we move forward and the need for sustainable energy generation becomes more and more important, who do you believe will have the greatest impact on driving this shift? Driven and passionate individuals or governmental and scientific organizations?
I'm happy to start. I would say the finance industry is to play a key role because they own the money and they dictate how do we want to further develop when it comes to sustainable energy. Then also businesses such as the company that I work for or that Megan works for play an important part, but I would also say the individuals such as you, because lots of the companies and lots of the finance institutions and lots of the pension funds know that their future clients are actually the students such as you. So you're the future generation. So we need, as I said, as many climate inspired individuals to drive this particular change and say to those old fashioned type mindsets that we need this change to happen, and we need it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I think, I mean, one of the best things, if not the best thing about working where I work and in the sector I work in is the people. It's incredibly exciting working on a sort of daily basis with people that are so interested and driven. And it's, I mean, for me, it's not hard to see why, because the technology we're working with, the sector we're working with, it's just a lot of fun, really. It's absolutely fascinating. It's changing every day. There are new challenges, and we wouldn't be able to overcome those challenges if driven and motivated and interested people didn't want to come into the sector. That's what's driving it, and that's what drives businesses. That's what drives governments as well. I mean, I used to work in offshore wind policy for the UK government. Across the board, we need people who engage, people who believe in this, and people who have the vision to actually realize this. Like 5 years ago, floating offshore wind, so offshore wind on floating platforms was like this weird kind of conceptual thing, and no one really thought it was going to happen. And now it's the norm. That's what's going to be the future. There's going to be no more wind in Scotland apart from floating. It's just accepted. And in the early days, I thought 5 years ago, people were like, oh yeah, no, floating wind's not going to happen. And it was a few people going, no, we can make this happen. We can show you, we can prove it, we can make the costs right, we can make the business case. And it's great to see that that's actually happening, and seeing that change, that just a few people are pushing through and having huge impacts.
This is for Diana. Niles asked, what are the main challenges that governments find when trying to implement solar energy as part of their energy mix?
So I would say, as I said previously, now it's really readily available and it's quite affordable. So I wouldn't say there are many challenges now. In past, the technology itself used to be quite expensive. So there were lots of challenges trying to employ this technology, and therefore we needed subsidized tariffs, feed-in tariffs to be able to do that. But now, as I said, I don't think there are any more obstacles. It's affordable. The environmental impact is really limited in comparison to other non-renewable energy sources, definitely, but even a number of other renewable energy sources. So I'd say it's just the willingness and the push forward that is needed in order to deploy this technology further.
Another question from Tom is, can solar energy be stored, for example, in batteries?
This is actually a very, very important question, because the solar energy from sun is intermittent. So during the night, we don't have solar energy. And that is one actually of the key disadvantages of solar technologies. What do we do during the night? So this is why it's very important. And there is a lots of research and investment now going in the battery storage to be able to store any excess electricity produced through solar during the day, in order to be able to power the households and industry during the night. At the moment, this is only achieved by combining solar with some other sources of energy, such as wind, in order to meet the nighttime demand. So it's a really, really good question, and definitely the area that a lot of research and money is going to at the moment.
Maybe I can just pick up on that as well, because in my mind, from a sort of technical perspective, I think the storage issue is the biggest barrier for renewable energy. You know, obviously solar doesn't generate at night, and wind doesn't generate if the wind's not blowing. It's fairly consistent, but you can never predict it. And so you need to kind of go back to why the energy mix is important, but also storage and managing that kind of intermittency. So what we're seeing is one of the biggest barriers for offshore wind, because of the scale of deployments, is actually the export. Like, how do you manage it from a system level? And that's a really interesting question. And we're seeing, again, like with the emergence of electric vehicles and smart metering, really relevant for the renewable sector and essential. Like, we can use, so the national grid could use sort of car batteries being charged to charge up or stop the charging to account for low, like times of low wind, low sun, all that sort of stuff. We can use smart meters to switch people's fridges off just for 10 minutes, just to sort of get rid of that peak. And I mean, that's a really, obviously offshore wind's great, but like actually energy system stuff, very geeky, but hugely important and really, really fascinating too. So I would encourage anyone who's like interested to have a look at National Grid information on that, because it's just fascinating to see how they're managing these kind of peaks and demands in load. And it's really important for renewable energy as well.
Alex has asked, do you ever find energy companies that are not willing to take up your technology? Who is commissioning this work?
So wind or solar again?
Yeah, I guess it can apply to either.
Well, I mean, in terms of offshore wind, it's market-led. So anyone who wants to build a wind farm, they basically, it's like an auction process to win rights. In the UK, it's different around the world, but in the UK, it's an auction process for winning rights. So anyone who wants to kind of get involved in the market can. And not all energy companies build renewable energy. Like your suppliers, like your, I don't know, your British Gas, your SSE, like whoever's on your electricity bill, don't necessarily all build it, but a lot of them do. In the UK, it's actually mostly Danish energy companies that are building our offshore wind farms, but they are making an awful lot of money out of it. So the UK companies like SSE, Scottish and Southern Energy, and RWE Energy, they're all building them a lot as well. So it's market-led, but yeah, a lot of people are getting involved.
Similarly, on the solar side, so previously our key customers were just grid, electricity companies, but now there is such a huge demand. Lots of companies are trying to source their electricity from more sustainable sources. So we see significant increase in our customer base. For example, some of our biggest customers now are data services providers such as Amazon or Microsoft. So we now have all of them wanting to have a solar park in the proximity of their facilities to be able to source their electricity more sustainably.
One question from Alex is, how will the national grid cope with renewable energy?
It kind of goes back to my previous point. It's a big challenge. And they're doing a lot of work at the moment to make sure that they have enough control over the energy system. So they have various tools. So for example, so basically national grids need to balance supply and demand exactly. And if they don't, all the lights go off in the country. So if you've got a period where you're not producing so much energy, you need to reduce the demand. So basically they phone up like car manufacturers or big like factories that they have contracts and agreements with and say, switch off all your production because we can't we can't give you the energy. So that sort of then, so you drop in demand and then they artificially drop the supply. Similarly, if there's too much wind or too much solar, which happens a lot, and there's actually not enough people switching their lights on and using their ovens that actually can use that energy, it works both ways. So we'll phone up the wind farms and say, park your turbines, and they just stop the turbines spinning, so they stop generating. So so on a sort of day-to-day basis, that's how they manage it. On a kind of ongoing basis, it's bringing in like energy storage. So for example, there's a large pumped storage. So basically in North Wales, they've hollowed out a mountain, like genuinely got a mountain, emptied it out, put a load of water in it and a pool at the bottom, and they pump it up and down to like, so if they need to store it, they pump it up. They've got too much energy, and so that takes energy. And if they need more energy, they can release it and pump it down, and it spins turbines and puts more energy into the grid. That's called Dinorwig, and they're actually building another one next to it. So this whole area is absolutely fascinating and incredibly complicated and incredibly important, and because coal and gas are very easy to switch on, switch off, easy peasy done. Nuclear is an absolute nightmare. You can't do it at all. But coal and gas, easy. Renewable energy, kind of easy to switch off, not easy to switch on. So we've got different issues, and now we're moving towards renewables. It's becoming more of a headache. So yeah, fascinating topic, and probably worth a good hour of discussion in itself. So I'll stop there.
Cool. So Laura's just asked, do you think renewable energy will be installed effectively for everyone in the UK before climate change becomes irreversible?
I can only say I really, really hope so. So the government has very ambitious plans. I'm sure you have all heard of the Green Deal. And for the Green Deal to be achieved, one of the key pre-requirements is to deploy the renewable energy and to decarbonize the energy sector. So my hopes are with the UK government in delivering their Green Deal, which should be timely, hopefully, to prevent the irreversible changes.
So a question from Tom is, for both of you, what are some of the major barriers to both methods of renewable energy face when being developed, built and installed?
So from a technical perspective for offshore wind, I mean, there are so many. I think, one of the big things is grid integration, which I've mentioned. So that's like actually getting the energy onto the grid and helping National Grid manage that flow. And also the fact that these turbines are getting massively big, huge, and so far offshore. We just need the sort of vessels to be able, I mean, just the cranes, right? Like, so they get installed, the fixed turbines get installed by giant boats, like they're huge, that then jack up and get lifted up, and then these cranes that sort of install them. But actually, if we're going to deeper waters, they're not going to be sufficient. And as I said, they're hundreds of millions of pounds to produce. So the lead time on that is quite big. So we need to kind of keep the momentum up. I mean, it's going to happen. It's happening, but we're just meeting new barriers every time we get a bigger turbine.
Cool. Just got one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm happy to go on to the next question. I just wanted to add, the only thing I would add to what Megan said is also sometimes we face stakeholders opposition. So definitely both kind of solar and wind is nicer to have next door rather than thermal power plants. But again, lots of the community members are oftentimes concerned about the landscape impact and how and various other impacts that these projects might have on them. So this is something that needs to be carefully considered, and community members need to be informed as part of the stakeholder engagement at the early stages of project development.
Cool. Just got one last one from Charlie saying, do you think that efficiency gains in renewable sectors in developed nations may lead to an increase in coal and oil use in less developed nations because of less demand of non-renewable resources by developed nations? It's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, so that's a really, really interesting question. So as I mentioned before, we've been doing a lot of work in, so I'm doing a lot of work in advising Chinese government and Japanese government and Indian government on sort of offshore wind, but also like wider renewable energy policy too. And there is a risk there, but I think the short answer is probably not, because actually with anything you have economies of scale. So actually if we're mining less coal, it costs more to mine a small amount than it does to mine a big amount. So actually and if we can reduce the cost of solar and offshore wind, that then sort of other nations can take advantage of those lower costs, then it's kind of a bit of a kind of nice balance that both will provide this kind of market effect. But that is certainly a risk, and it's something that's been really worrying us actually over the last few years, but it's not something we're seeing happening.
I fully second that. And just the final thought, it's a really, really good question, because lots of the developing countries now say, wait a second, you've been polluting for so many years since the Industrial Revolution in the Western world, and now you suddenly change your course, want to be all sustainable, and now you're trying to impose that on us. So let us now kind of keep developing our economies, keep burning coal and similar. So this is why the large international agreements such as the Paris Agreement and similar are in place to kind of try and make the joint effort, because similarly as with COVID, one thing that we learned is that we can only tackle the challenge if we all make our own contribution. And so similarly with the climate change, we need all countries equally contributing if we are to deal with this massive problem.
Okay, I think I'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Diana, and thank you, Megan, for speaking. Thank you to everyone else who's attended this, and thank you to everyone who's organised it. Before I forget, next week we have a talk called The Art of Surgery about how craft work applies to surgery. Thanks again.